Welcome, everyone, to the latest Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast. Got a lot to break down regarding the Detroit Lions this week. Next week is the Scouting Combine, the first opportunity to kind of get more of an in-depth look at what's going on with the prospects. More and more names are emerging that could fit. Draft analyst Daniel Jeremiah spent over 3-4 hours, I think, talking to reporters, talking to the NFL world about his latest mock draft, who he thought would fit at different spots. Lots of Lions reporters were on hand as well, checking in regarding who could fit at 28, who could be a potential fit based on what Brad Holmes likes to draft, patterns that have emerged, things like that. So lots to talk about next week, as well as I'll be at the Combine to talk to Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, the coordinators, get a first look at some of the key edge rushers. It'll be a fun week in Indianapolis. We'll have a preview as well coming to you guys Monday, talking about the Combine. But this week, lots to get to in regards to a first look. Many thought that we'd get our first look at John Morton and Kelvin Sheppard next week at the Combine. But nope, both had an opportunity to sit down with Dan Campbell. We're going to give our first reactions, what we thought of what Kelvin Sheppard said, what we thought about what John Morton said, how they presented themselves. We'll also talk about and recap what Daniel Jeremiah did indeed say. He had a lot of interesting nuggets about Myles Garrett, who he thinks could fit at number 28, who could be available at 60, players that have a lot of versatility that Brad Holmes and the Lions would find appealing based on the past history and track record of who the Lions draft and develop. So very intriguing stuff there. And then the latest, what we're hearing from the NFL world regarding the latest projections as to who could be there at 28. A lot more names have now started to emerge. Like we said, it's a deep draft class along the defensive line and offensive line. So you have an opportunity for us to talk about who could be there at 28. That's also intriguing. Size, speed along the interior of the defensive line or edge rushers. So we'll talk about all that this week on another stacked Lone Wolves podcast. But Christian, starting here, what was your impression of Kelvin Sheppard and John Morton speaking to the media for the first time, sitting down with Fox 2's Dan Miller, the Lions play-by-play voice? You could kind of get a sense, my opinion was, that Kelvin Sheppard clearly has more of a comfort level speaking to the media. I thought he delivered the message, talking points, what you wanted to hear from Kelvin Sheppard regarding wanting the defense to be relentless, kind of talking about Terrion Arnold and his development, knowing that Kelvin Sheppard did admit that there were opportunities maybe he could have taken outside of the Lions, but he wanted to stay and really work for Dan Campbell. It would have been hard for him to leave, knowing that Dan Campbell really was one of the key people that pushed him to be a coach and to work his way up the Lions organization. Also, too, the little nugget that, hey, working with the outside linebackers at first was something that was challenging but welcome because it helped him to develop a way in which you maybe learn techniques different from the position that you played. So it helps you to continue to be a well-rounded coach. And that's why you get interesting moves like, Scotty Montgomery moving from running backs coach to receivers, Seth Ryan now working with tight ends. So you have opportunities now for coaches to continue to develop and build. And that's what happens. You got to also remember, the likes of Ben Johnson worked with tight ends, then passing game coordinator, worked his way up to be able to become an offensive coordinator. And that's a way to get well-rounded, is to be able to work with different position groups. Now, John Morton was a little bit more reserved. His was more of a traditional type session where it was more direct, but I thought the most interesting nugget was kind of revealing what he felt about his time with the Jets that didn't go well. And I think he gave an honest answer. He said that, hey, I work with coaches that I kind of didn't know, and that makes it tough with a recipe when you're trying to bring people together. But I thought that also, when you look at it, that's a situation in which it's on his record that didn't go well. There were some warts that emerged then, but I think the thing that allows people to should have more confidence with John Morton is that he gained experience from a situation that didn't go right. And I think that him being here in 2022 lends to a lot of credibility. That's how we found him on how Lines on SI discovered his name and figuring that he was a fit that we posted and shared before he got officially hired. What was your reaction? What was your takeaways? What was your first impressions of John Morton and Kelvin Shepard as they stood in front of Dan Miller and sat down and had an in-depth conversation? Something to check out definitely on social media.
Yeah, 100%. I thought both did a really good job, and I think that both of them are motivated. That was really the clear thing that came across to me is both of them are motivated, albeit for different reasons. Kelvin Shepard wants to prove all of the people who have supported him and helped him get where he is today. He wants to prove them all right. He wants to go out there and do a good job. He's very motivated. He loves Detroit. He loves working for Dan Campbell, and so it's going to be really exciting to see him as the pilot of that defense, so to speak. And then for John Morton, he has been a coordinator previously. He did it for a year with the Jets, and he struggled. And, the results were what they were. And he's coming back home to Michigan, and he had helped install this offense when he was on staff a couple of years ago. And so for him, that motivating factor is to help bring a championship to his home state. And as kind of that local product, he has a lot of motivation to go out there and help the Lions finish the job. And the one thing that really intrigued me with him is just how much he talked about the comfort level that Jared Goff's going to have in this offense and how they're going to really tailor to his skill set and what he likes. And I think on paper, that's a recipe for success. Now, what that looks like in September and October and November and into, the winter and the postseason remains to be seen. But I think where he's at from a mental perspective, I think John Morton has the right philosophy and the right idea of how he wants to grow this thing offensively. And then defensively, I loved what Kelvin Shepard had to say in terms of just the defense being tenacious and physical and relentless. I think those are all qualities that the Lions have drafted to with their guys that they've brought in over the last 4 years under general manager Brad Holmes. So I love the fact that neither coordinator sounds like they want to change too much of the team's identity. I think that's a recipe for success. They're going to follow the blueprint while putting their own personal spin on it. And I think the Lions have two pretty solid leaders at the coordinator positions in terms of offense and defense, and then obviously Dave Phipp on special teams. So I'm really excited to see how it all plays out. I was impressed by what both had to say, as well as the fact that both of them know what is at stake for Detroit. They know this is a team that's been built to go on a championship run, and they want to go do that, and that's the expectation, and that's really what the Lions need moving forward after having two exceptional coordinators in their position previously. So it's exciting to think about the fact that in 2 years from now, we could be having the same conversations about Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, about John Morton and not Kelvin Shepard. So it's an exciting time for Lions fans. And really moving forward, the entire coaching staff has been finalized. The Lions announced it earlier this week. And I wanted to get your thoughts on just the changes that the Lions have made in terms of bringing in new hires from the collegiate level with Tyler Roll and Tashard Choice. Obviously, we've talked on the coordinators, and then some new intriguing names, just kind of balancing out the entire staff. Some moves like Scotty Montgomery to wide receivers. So what's your initial impression of the Lions 2025 coaching staff, and where do you think this group has grown, and what do you think is on tap for them in 2025?
Yeah, it's a lot of new assistants, right? And it's going to definitely lend to some, a little bit of concern regarding how fast everybody's going to acclimate to potential changes, new voices in the room. I'm definitely intrigued by David Shaw. I think his vast experience that he brings to the table coaching collegiately, also working with the Broncos. I think that the tie that will definitely help the offense is the relationship that he has with John Morton. They can see the game the same way. They can bounce ideas off each other. And the idea is to build a well-rounded offense. I think that the opportunity to have a different experienced voice in the room, definitely, I think, in addition. And you realize that with Scotty Montgomery and Hank Fraley there's some experience that is going to be welcomed by an offense that can definitely, I think, be infused with new ideas, different ways of tackling similar questions. And I think that that's also, every 3-4 years, it's not a bad idea to just get a different voice in the room. And I think that the one thing I'm intrigued by is how Scotty Montgomery is going to work with Jameson Williams, how that relationship will develop, because I think that one of the key factors, and probably the biggest factor, is how Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams evolve. And I'm curious to see. I think that Tashard Choice will be a very, very underrated hire that I think will help Jahmyr Gibbs get to the next level. The comfort level of someone that knew what it would take to get Jahmyr Gibbs to Georgia Tech and help him get coached up and to know somebody already that kind of has the foundational pieces. And also, too, Scotty Montgomery will be part of the meeting room. So I do think that coming in, Scotty Montgomery will impart as much knowledge on Tashard Choice as possible. And I think that what's interesting and intriguing is that when you overhaul a coaching staff, there's still some value in working with big programs, working with Texas, working with Stanford. I think that the idea is that Dan Campbell likes experienced coaches that have played before and can relate to the players. So I think each hire was crafted to help the players relate faster. So I'm not terribly concerned. I think defensively, I'm curious to see how, Sean Dion Hamilton's role will continue to evolve with the linebackers, some of the moves defensively. I think that, an underrated person already on the staff that I think is on the track of development as well as Deshae Townsend. I think that his work with the Lions defense and secondary is going to be key. Jim O'Brien with the safeties, give him a lot of credit with the defensive backs, and his defensive prowess has helped this defense. So Kelvin Sheppard, I think, has a lot of experience with now this defense and the players, so he's going to have a firm understanding of what's going on. I think that's fair in regards to maintaining a continuous working relationship with the defense, especially with some changes that are going to happen along the defensive line. And I think for the defense, the development of some of those young players is going to be very key to get those guys coached up. And so the hire that everybody's going to probably get to know fast and I think will pay dividends is Casey Rogers. I think that hire is going to pay dividends for Broderick Martin, Mekhi Wingo, and then the returning Aiden Hutchinson and Ali McNeil, and hopefully some big name free agents will be definitely involved in the mix. So I think the coaching staff set. Dan Campbell, I think, has earned the reputation of pretty much targeting coaches that relate to players well. And if there are mistakes, then Dan Campbell is not hesitant to move on, a la Dre Bly. It just didn't work out after a year. And, the defensive line hopefully can have some continuity with the coaching staff as they keep turning it over. But I am curious to get back to the coaches real fast. Okay. When you look at the coordinators, are you concerned at all about Jared Goff and clearly how tight he was with John Morton? How tight he was, excuse me, with Ben Johnson, crafted an offense. Do you think that there may be an adjustment period early, or do you say, the talent's there, that if John Morton doesn't make drastic changes, maybe just a subtle difference in play calling? I think the defense, the continuity will be there. Man-to-man defense, pressuring, attacking. There may be some differences. It's maybe the percentages of zone coverage versus man at different times, but I do think that you can kind of predict a little bit more. The offense might have a little bit more question marks. Are you concerned at all about the transition with a new outside voice coming in? But he was here, but this is somebody that has not called plays in a long time. And this is an offense that probably needs to be delicate, but I think everybody's comfortable because Dan Campbell will be in the room as well, helping out. But the biggest revelation was John Morton is calling the plays. Any concern about transition and what can help John Morton maybe transition faster to be a great offensive coordinator? Because the one that they had before got up there to be the level of being a great play caller and took advantages of a lot of mismatches.
Yeah, I'm not concerned right now. And the reason I'm not concerned is the fact that John Morton was here in 2022 after Jared Goff was coming off of what really was a rough first year with the Lions in 2021. And Morton was part of the conversations that helped the Lions formulate this scheme that has allowed Goff to take off. And so while he hasn't called plays in a long time, that's not something I'm necessarily super concerned about just because look at all the weapons they have at their disposal. And so his job is to now find ways to create mismatches or advantages in those situations. And that, I mean, with his background, he shouldn't have any trouble doing that. And he did mention during his interview with Fox 2, just the fact that when he was the offensive coordinator with the Jets, he walked onto a staff that already had a bunch of position coaches in place, and it was his job to adapt. Now he's coming to a situation where he's got familiarity. He knows Dan Campbell. He knows all these coaches within the system who have been there for a long time. And so for him, the transition will be much smoother. And I think when you listen to him talk about just how important Jared Goff is going to be to the whole development of this process with this new offense, I think that the level of concern is really, really low right now. Now, if Jared Goff goes out there and puts up a stinker in the first couple of weeks of the season, then we can revisit this conversation. But I think based on where we're at right now and kind of the baseline for where Jared Goff is at right now in his career, I feel pretty confident about John Morton's ability to unlock the offense moving forward.
And to wrap up, I think that the thing that he said that was most important was what he saw on the field. keep the football in your own possession, the importance of
Hmm.
not turning the football over. And it ended up being so clear that teams that lost in the postseason clearly lost a turnover battle. And that's what did the Lions in, was the fact that against the Commanders, far, far too many turnovers, far too many mistakes. And if that can be drilled into this team, especially when it comes to playoff time, making sure that the importance of getting turnovers is in your favor and not making those critical mistakes, I think will be glaring as the Lions enter 2025. Now, turning our attention to Daniel Jeremiah, I thought that, he's one of the elite, minds out there in regards to scouting, having been in the league and now working with NFL Network. This is his time to shine. And annually, he does a couple of conference calls where you can pick his brain and he'll tell you why he posted the things that he did in his mock drafts and the things that he talked about. And you look at it from the perspective of somebody with a mind to understand not only the Lions, but the entire league. What was your takeaway in terms of his latest mock draft, who he had at 28, and his explanation as to what can benefit the Detroit Lions?
Yeah, first off, I want to preface this by saying Daniel Jeremiah is one of the best people in the business. Like, he does these conference calls leading up to the combine and leading up to the draft, and he will sit on that Zoom call and answer every single question that is asked. And I mean, like, yesterday is a prime example. It was 3, 4 hours of him just talking the draft, and he's so knowledgeable, and his experience as a scout is so awesome, and he really makes the people who ask him questions, he really thoroughly answers every single question. He puts a lot of thought into the scouting process, and he does an excellent job articulating that kind of football jargon that scouts use, and portraying that with his coverage of the NFL draft. So I just wanted to start by giving him his props, because that was awesome what he did yesterday, and what he continues to do for reporters and fans and people who follow his coverage is really awesome. But in terms of the Lions, he had Donovan Jackson, the interior offensive lineman, going 28th overall to the Detroit Lions in his latest mock draft. And the way he kind of explained it was the Lions they built their culture right there. When Holmes and Campbell took over, the first thing they did was address the trenches, the offensive line and the defensive line. And each of their first 3 picks in that first draft were on one either side of the ball with the line: Penei Sewell, Levi Onwuzurike, and Lee McNeil. Boom, boom, boom. And they started to really address the trenches in that first draft. And then as time has gone on, you've seen them kind of stack playmakers, guys like Jamison Williams and Jahmyr Gibbs, and you've got your flashy edge rusher and Aiden Hutchinson. Like, your skill guys are now in place. And now the thought process for Jeremiah is, if the Lions are continuing to follow that track, it might just be the time to go full circle and go back to the trenches. And so he had Donovan Jackson with his pick. He mentioned North Dakota State offensive lineman Gray Zabel as another potential guy. Tyler Booker is another guy to keep an eye on from Alabama. And then in terms of edge rushers, I was really intrigued by the fact that he mentioned a guy like Tennessee's James Pierce, who, if you look at the different mock drafts and where certain media outlets have him, he's all over the place. He could go top 15. He could go end of the first round. He could go second round. Like, there's just so many varying opinions on him. He's an electric player who, I mean, his ability to get off the ball, he's super explosive. And I've really liked what I've been able to see on tape from him to this point. And then another guy, Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, who's kind of a hybrid. Maybe he's suited a little bit more on the interior based on his frame, but again, he's got some pass rush juice as well, and a really solid run defender. So those are a couple of the guys he mentioned as far as fits at 28. But then you took a look at, I mean, there was a lot of Lions representation on this call, and you took a look at some of the guys that he thought could fit the Lions in terms of being Swiss Army knives. So what were your thoughts on a couple of the names he mentioned, and how do you see that potentially fitting the Detroit Lions?
Yeah, I just think that first and foremost, what the kind of pattern that's developed and emerged with Brad Holmes is they want draft picks that not only are just like they want prospects that can do a bunch of different things. Like, you want an individual like Brian Branch where you see that, okay, if there's a need at nickel, boom, you can put him there. If you transition him where he started as a nickel cornerback, but then the potential when you lose a safety like CJ Gardner-Johnson to the Eagles, you put him back there and he shines. And similarly with Ifeatu Melifonwu, the issue for him has been health, but he transitioned from playing cornerback to safety and having a variety of roles doing different things. And that just allows your defense to have so much more of an advantageous situation, right? When you have players that are able to do a bunch of different things. And I think that's where you recognize how Brad Holmes has done. And I think that that's the next step is recognizing, okay, with Broderick Martin and with Makai Wingo, what they can do and how they're able to handle everything. So I'm curious to see how it's all going to shake out with the prospects that are going to be targeted. But he listed three, and I think the first name that caught everybody's attention is Ole Miss's J.J. Peggs. I think that what he can do is unbelievable in regards to somebody that can play defensive tackle and then is also somebody that can put the football in his hands and do some things offensively. So that's somebody that you classify as a football player. But I think that he'd project a little bit more toward being a defensive tackle. But what Jeremiah highlighted was, there's a lot of interesting players in the league, especially with the Ravens, who've also taken defensive players and put them at fullback. You have opportunities to kind of have some skill advantages for guys that have the ability. They've seen what JJ can do with the football in his hands out there at Ole Miss. So he's very intriguing in the fact that he can do a
Hmm.
lot of different things. I like the reference to USC running back Woody Marks, somebody that is very productive and can be somebody that can compete with Sione Vaki or Craig Reynolds if you want to add competition. And then the name that was intriguing when you heard it and then go back and look at what he can do, but he's not going to be at the combine, is Willie Lampkin from North Carolina. Somebody that is just, that I think the appeal was the fact that he at 5'10" and 270 pounds, he's a center, but so athletic that can do a bunch of different things for pulling offensive lines. And one of those situations in which you've seen different situations where the Detroit Lions maybe need some more athleticism along the offensive line. And I'm curious to see, because the Lions have targeted some of those HBCU or they've scouted players from Canada. They've scouted some players from like William and Mary. So they've looked at players that maybe that are not so the way you look at it is not right like right there from the SEC. And maybe North Carolina's Willie Lampkin is somebody that, maybe on paper doesn't look like size-wise can do things, but can do a bunch of maybe different things. I would say he's probably more the long shot, but I think the intriguing aspect. What did you think of the reference to Ole Miss's defensive tackle? Because I thought that when you look at it from the scouting perspective, I think he definitely jumps off the screen as somebody that could be both a Dan Campbell and a Brad Holmes guy.
Oh, 100%. My initial reaction is I want this guy on my football team, right? I mean, I think that he is just the prototypical like Detroit Lion. When you go back and look, and Daniel Jeremiah says that, and that's not a prospect I was super familiar with going into the call. Obviously, the names, but there's just not enough hours in the day to get to everybody at this stage of the offseason. But so then I when I hear the name and I hear everything he can do, it's like, okay, well, let's go check this out. And yeah, I mean, he is. It's unbelievable. They throw him out there at H-back. He'll block in the run. He'll carry the ball as a wildcat quarterback. And then, oh, by the way, he's a really good defensive tackle. Like
Yep.
I think that when you look at the Lions draft history and you see a guy like this, like they're not the same player by any means, but the versatility reminds me a lot of the Lions and what they did with Sione Vaki last year. Now, I'm not saying they're going to make J.J. Pegues the backup quarterback by any means, but just the ability to do different things well and having the natural instinct. When Vaki was drafted, they talked about how they were moving him to running back because of natural instincts. And a lot of what Pegues offers defensively, you can see the instincts at the defensive tackle position. So no, I don't expect him to change positions. I mean, maybe there could be a package for him at fullback at the next level, but I still think that what he does athletically, he's a natural. I think that there are some developmental things that he can stand to fine tune. I don't expect him to be a first round pick by any means, but I think that versatility can be kind of a defining factor that can help him get bumped up in the middle rounds where maybe if he's projected to be a fourth round pick, somebody sees that versatility and says we can work with this, and so now they go and get him in the third round. So I really like the versatility that he has to offer. It's so fun to see him be able to do different things. I think he's a really fun football player to watch. And the Lions do have a need on the interior defensive line. Like I do see him as potentially being a guy who can come in and contribute, and he's got all the athletic tools. And with Casey Rogers, you've got one of the best in the business as your defensive line coach. And you see a player like Pegues, and if Casey Rogers can't, iron out what needs to be ironed out, then maybe nobody can. So if you're the Lions and you see a developmental defensive tackle like that who has the traits athletically and instinctually to be a really good football player, then why not go get him? And so I think that moving forward, this should be a name we watch out for, where whether it's leaked combine interviews or pro days, things like that. I wouldn't be surprised if the Lions do their due diligence on him moving forward.
Yeah, and I think the other big aspect that he talked about that was asked, I think that everyone wants to know about is what Jeremiah felt about Myles Garrett joining the Lions. And I think that currently, as everybody knows, the Browns are going to stand firm and make teams make them a major offer. So currently, the belief is that the Browns are standing pat, not going to trade him. But I think that's just a negotiating ploy. When you have a player that openly says, I don't want to be here, that just indicates he's not going to show up to OTA. He's basically disconnected from the team. So eventually, the Browns are just scrambling to find the best offer. But what I think everybody recognizes is that anybody with a football mind realizes that adding a player of Myles Garrett caliber is going to be worth it. Now, the question mark is going to be how much draft capital, how much is it going to cost? Because clearly there's going to be a couple teams. And here's the dynamic. I think people that stand firm and are like, oh, the mindset of saying that Myles Garrett is the final piece to the puzzle. Well, first and foremost, it is true. The Lions have not done the best job of consistently having defensive linemen that are going to be Super Bowl caliber. Now, here's the thing. They're good. They're playoff good. They're ready. But at the same token, you recognize now that you have to look at it from the realistic perspective of Aleem McNeil's coming back from an injury. Aiden Hutchinson is coming back from an injury. It's not the romantic, hey, this is the same Aiden Hutchinson that started off the year 7.5 sacks. You hope he's 100%, but you have to take into account he's coming off of a major injury. What's that going to look like to his game? Any decline in speed, that's an advantage to the offensive lineman. Now, most people project that he's going to be fine, but Aleem McNeil, you don't know that you can't just project that everybody comes back from injury perfectly healthy, shines, and comes back to their regular self. Everybody's different. And so you're going to need the answers opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. And so the answer is always more. The answer from a perspective from this chair is always more. That you recognize now that the Eagles' defensive line has Jalen Carter, Nakobe Dean, who'll come back from injury, Nolan Smith. You have some young prospects there that are young and hungry and very talented. Now, they may lose some pieces, but they're going to end up adding pieces as well that are going to probably be contributors. So you need to continue to add. And I don't worry about what does the narrative mean that if you add Myles Garrett. What it means is that you add a player that will be a player that's going to help everybody. So that will be a piece that will help you win a Super Bowl. So you don't have a ring yet. You have nothing. You've accomplished nothing in the National Football League on the grandest stage. So to add as many good players that you recognize, yes, do it. Who cares what it means? That's all side. That's all inconsequential. The only thing that should matter is, does Myles Garrett help you get closer to the Super Bowl than you are? The answer is yes. An astounding yes. And so clearly Daniel Jeremiah is going to say, do whatever you can to be aggressive. And that's what the situation is that sometimes when you're close, you take the swing. And who's going to fault you for giving up capital to swing for Myles Garrett? Nobody. You're going to get all the credit for being aggressive and you keep it moving. Who cares what it means? Yeah, you're going to acknowledge that you didn't draft well with the defensive line. Great. You drafted well on offense. You drafted great in a lot of other spots in the secondary. You can't be perfect. So no one's going to, really, in bottom line, going to care when you have one position group that's a wart and the rest are amazing. It's just the way it is. But in the end, in 2024, you did not get to the NFC Championship game. And quickly, other teams are stacking up the capital and stacking up their coaches and competing. That's how quickly NFL teams can rise up and fall. So adding Myles Garrett, in my opinion, plus, 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 plus. And any of you that are expressing concern or wondering why, it's hilarious because Myles Garrett, Aleem McNeil, Aiden Hutchinson. Yeah, you still have the question marks regarding what the others can do, but I would presume that Myles Garrett could make Broderick Martin better just by his presence alone. Okay, and then if you find that there's more need, you can. Hey, it doesn't mean that if you add Myles Garrett, you just stop your operation at the trade deadline next year. Add more. more. The idea is always more, and it's their job to figure out the cap and the fit and the coaching. That's their job. Our job is to demand the best talent show up to the Lions, whether they're drafted or they're free agent. So I love what they've done in the draft, but the free agency has been far more difficult to find players. And that's why I think that maybe there is more of a reservation, but I don't think Myles Garrett would have a chance to be a whiff in Detroit as a free agent. What did you make of Daniel Jeremiah saying, yeah, be aggressive? Of course, naturally, anybody looking at it, even from the outside, is going to say, go get Myles Garrett, add him to that defensive line. It makes Terry Arnold better. It makes Ennis Rakestraw better. It makes Amik Robertson that much better. It makes everything better. I mean, a professional NFL player said it into a microphone. Now, it's of course maybe hyperbole, but he says when you have a great defensive line, you don't need corners. He said literally, Amon-Ra St. Brown said you don't need corners. Now, of course you do. You need them to make plays, but what that means is that you take the pressure off them so much that they don't need to shine. They can just play free. They don't need to worry about, hey, if I give up something, it's going to potentially be damaging to this team. So I'm all for what Daniel Jeremiah said, and it confirmed. Look, of course, there's confirmation bias, but it makes football sense that Myles Garrett coming to the Lions for 2025 and 2026 gives the Lions their two best swings before you got to rebuild it again.
Yeah, and I really agree with what he had to say. I think that his argument, Daniel Jeremiah's that is, was that the Lions, this could be a finishing piece for the Lions. And you talk about the fact that Brad Holmes wants to bring a Super Bowl championship and a Super Bowl parade to the city of Detroit. Here's your shot. And as far as what it's going to take to get him, we don't necessarily know. We know it's going to be a hefty trade package, and the Lions are going to have to pony up. But I think that when your goal is to win a Super Bowl, sometimes you have to take those risks. And we talk about Brad Holmes taking risks in the draft and going after these edge rushers and things of that nature. Well, sometimes you just have to make the bigger move and go after the guy that's done it for the last however many years as a member of the Cleveland Browns, and that's Myles Garrett. And I think that when you really look at the impact he can have, I think he nailed it. He's going to make everybody around him better. If the Lions want to continue, which I assume there's no indication that they won't continue to play press man coverage and trust their corners and their safeties to handle their individual assignments, what can make your life easier than adding the most dominant pass rusher in the game opposite one of the best young ones in the game, and both on the field for 3 downs because they can take it physically? Like, there's so much to like about the potential pairing between Myles Garrett and Detroit. And, like you said, the Browns have given no indication that they want to make this deal. But if things start to change and the tides start to turn and Myles Garrett ends up somewhere that's not Detroit, I think that Lions fans are going to feel the hurt of that one. And so the second that Brad Holmes gets something he can work with in terms of an offer, I think you got to make the move because these windows open and close. And yes, Brad Holmes has been excellent in the draft, but we can't sit here and say whoever they get at 28 is going to have the same impact as Myles Garrett. And the Lions are going to be picking again late in the draft next year. And you talk about that next year first rounder. Is he going to give you what Myles Garrett can give you right now? And the answer is no. And so sometimes you just have to pony up the draft capital and trust your intuition and trust the fact that Myles Garrett is an established, really good player. And he can help the Lions win a Super Bowl and a Lombardi trophy. So, yeah, I'm all in on the move. I have been. And obviously, there's some salary cap stuff to work out, but I think in the short term, Myles Garrett, it gives the Lions the best chance to win the Super Bowl, and that's what we're in the business of. So yeah, we'll keep monitoring the situation, but right now, I think that if you get an offer or you get something you can work with, the answer has to be yes, and you have to work it out and move forward.
Yeah, the winning business, the talent acquisition business, and also the entertainment business. Myles Garrett sacking the quarterback is going to make a lot of people happy that are paying more for their season tickets. And the idea is the paying customer wants Myles Garrett. And you recognize that that's a player that I think can help, not maybe a final piece because you probably need a couple more, but a big, huge jolt to an area of weakness. And it's okay to jump the front of the line in terms of not developing the player opposite Aiden. It's okay. Let's go do that and make it happen. And I think that it's going to be, and here's the last point. Okay. You don't want Myles Garrett showing up with the Commanders or Eagles
Correct.
because you're in competition with the teams that are going to want to compete and be better. Great teams want to get greater. Good teams want to be great. Bad teams want to get better. And what if he ends up on the Bears? What if he ends up in the division? What if he ends up with the Packers? What's that going to send to you? You're going to have a diminished fan base that is going to not have any confidence that you're doing enough to put yourself in the position to win the Super Bowl. So you're in competition in regards to fan support, and you're in competition with competitiveness. So let's just hope then that the Patriots, in their overwhelming over $100 million in cap space, can make it so that, hey, he stays in the AFC, which I doubt, but we shall see. Real fast before we start talking about the edge rushers that have kind of surfaced for mock drafts for the Lions, the NFL did release the fact that the salary cap is going up even more by another $23 million, up over $50 million the last 2 years. I think it puts the Lions in a great position financially to be able to maybe look at extending Aiden Hutchinson and Kirby Joseph in the coming days. We'll talk more about them specifically. But the increase in the NFL salary cap, I think, puts together an opportunity for even more than expected. Many people thought it wasn't going to go up that much, but you're going to be potentially in the neighborhood of $282 million for the cap, which puts the Lions at getting about $50 million more. $50 million that they can start with before they start addressing Kirby Joseph and Aiden Hutchinson. And a lot of it probably is going to go toward those extensions. They're going to be big money. They're not going to be cheap. But it does, I think, give the Lions an advantage to have more salary cap space. And I think that the news, when that broke earlier this week about the salary cap going up, I think everybody smiled because that's just more money for Brad Holmes to play with.
Yeah, and I think that one of the more encouraging elements of this is, yes, it's great in the short term, but I'm looking ahead to 2026 and 2027 when all these extensions start to kind of pile up with talking about Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell. I mean, Sewell is technically on his fifth-year option this year, so he's not counting as much against the cap as he will moving forward. And they've signed a lot of people to hefty extensions, and that, I mean, you talked about it, Hutch, Kirby Joseph, Jamison Williams, like these are all guys that are lined up for potential extensions. And so when the salary cap number jumps as much as it did from last year to now this year, think about what it's going to do in another year. And there's talk about maybe Netflix getting in on a TV package, and that's going to be more money coming into the league. And all these new streaming services that they're putting games on, like that number is going to climb. That number is going to keep going up. And so if I'm the Lions, I'm a little encouraged by that. Like, hey, we can get away with, handing out some of these extensions. And I think that's why it was brilliant to get Amon-Ra and Sewell and Goff locked up when they did. Because like you saw, Dak Prescott got $60 million a year. Jared Goff is a better quarterback than Dak Prescott, and he's making less money. But it's because with the market, that number is going to continue to climb. And so if I'm the Lions, I'm trying to get Aiden Hutchinson, Kirby Joseph, Jamison Williams locked up tomorrow. Get that extension done because that number is only going to continue to climb. And as the salary cap gets higher, that number for these extensions and the value of these players is going to continue to go up. And so by continuing to stay proactive and get these players signed up early in the process, that's going to do wonders for this team. And you look at some of these teams that have gone all in, like the Saints and the Bills, and who now are on the wrong side of this salary cap deficit. And yes, the jump gives them less trouble, but I mean, you're talking about teams that are in the negatives. And the Lions are going to have to pay these high caliber players a lot of money, but by doing it early and staying ahead of the rising market, they can continue to avoid those tough situations and then obviously create more opportunities with the restructures and things of that nature. But I think the Lions are in a really good spot with the salary cap. And as that number continues to go up, then the worry for 26, 27, 28 with some of these extensions starts to go down. So if you're Brad Holmes, I think you got to be playing or feeling pretty good right now.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's only good news if it's going to go up by that much, 50 million in over 50 million in the last couple years. So we're creeping up over $300 million in the coming years for rosters to make sure that they're stocked with talent. And that's why it's important to draft and develop and keep your own. And so that's why the 2025 draft for the Lions, very key, especially after a 24 draft. Now, I think the philosophy is changing. You're realizing that a lot of these players are competing for reserve roles with a lot of established starters on the Lions right now. But look, everybody's competitive. And right now, there's an opportunity for a young draft prospect, especially playing edge, that has an opportunity to force their way in. And that's what everybody wants, is that, hey, you don't have to take a back seat. If you're a good player and you're competitive, there's a chance you'll have an opportunity. And just looking at here real fast before we depart this week, lots of new names have emerged at number 28, and a couple of mock drafts this week projected Nick Skirton, the defensive lineman, the very talented, quick, and powerful edge rusher there to have an opportunity to potentially do some things. What did you make of him and why people are projecting him? Tell us a little bit about Nick Skirton and why he's showing up in some mock drafts.
Yeah, he's big and physical, and he can get after it. Transferred to Texas A&M from Purdue, and he had a really good last year at Purdue. The production wasn't quite as high for the Aggies this year, but I think in terms of physical tools, there's a lot to like about Nick Skirton, and I think moving forward, he's kind of a guy that may not have the high-end physical traits or seasoning per se in terms of being able to be a huge impact player day one. And I know some aren't as high on him. Like I know Daniel Jeremiah was kind of explaining why he's not the biggest fan of the Texas A&M edge defender, but I do think there's a lot to like about him potentially at 28th overall. And who knows? I mean, I think this is a big week for him in Indianapolis, because if he does well in Indianapolis, then I think he cements himself as kind of a late first round pick, potentially early second, if depending on teams trading up and things of that nature. But and if he doesn't get it, then I think you could start to talk about maybe him being available in the mid 50s. Like that's just the nature of this edge rusher position. Like a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Mike Green being there for the Lions at 28th overall.
Might not be there.
I was saying Daniel Jeremiah's latest mock draft, he went 9th to the New Orleans Saints. So that's just the way this is going to be as we continue to move forward throughout this offseason process. Like Mike Green went to the Senior Bowl, crushed it, and his draft stock skyrocketing. Yeah, now Nick Skirton has a chance to really boost himself at the scouting combine and show why he deserves to be in that conversation as a first-round pick. And there really is a cluster of edge rushers where I think DJ put it well last week.
Real fast, with a profile. Yeah, with every player, there's things they do well and things they don't.
Yeah.
What did Jeremiah highlight that he doesn't do well, and what does he bring to the table? What can he put in front of coaches that says, hey, take me?
Yeah, I mean, it's physicality. He's imposing. He's big. Like, he checks those boxes. But I think there's some things in terms of getting off of blocks and using his hands, technique things that can be sharpened. And I think that when you look at a player like that, that's another guy where Casey Rogers could do wonders. Like, you want to talk about unlocking physical tools. Like, he is a massive guy. But again, it's all just kind of technique things that he can sharpen. Is he the most explosive athlete? I don't know. And again, those are all things that he can show at the combine, like run the 40, do all that stuff. Like, don't sit out those drills. Prove it. And like I said, I think that he's another guy that could be a combine riser after when we reconvene after next week. And then, like I was saying, like there's a cluster of guys. Like, this is a deep edge rusher class where if the Lions decide not to go edge at 28th overall, there's still going to be good players on the board at 60. So the combine with that position group is going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to watch it.
Now, finally here, lots of new names. Clearly, everybody's now putting out their mock drafts. Some beat writers, their first mock drafts. Others are, now in the mix of learning, moving up players that are getting the buzz and things like that. Who are some names now that are kind of circulating in the mock draft roundups that you're seeing that Lions fans can now fire up the social media highlights and find out about, as well as and also too, check out Lions on SI as we profile Skirton, in the coming days, especially around the combine, some of the edge rushers that people are talking about.
Yeah, shout out to Vito, our guy Vito Churko. He compiled everything in the mock draft roundup, and a couple of names really stick out to me. Obviously, edge rusher is still the hot position in terms of where the Lions are expected to go. We talked a little bit earlier about interior offensive line as well. Gray Zabel is one of the guys, Donovan Jackson, obviously, in Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft. But a couple of guys that really stand out. We talked about Skirton. How about Boston College's Donovan? I apologize if I mispronounce this. Donovan Ezeraku. He is a long physical defender. 16 and a half sacks for the Eagles. I mean, talk about a guy who's done it. He produced in the ACC. He's kind of another guy with a lot of potential. Like, the technique things that need to be sharpened, but in terms of physicality and athletic and overall traits, like, there's a lot to like about him at the NFL level. And then another guy that really caught my eye is Kenneth Grant. And the reason that Kenneth Grant, like I obviously you grew up in Michigan, you watch a lot of Michigan football. Kenneth Grant is an unbelievable athlete for his size, and he is a big guy, and he runs like a deer, and he can chase down plays from behind. Like I really like Kenneth Grant's game. I'm not super sold on how exactly he would fit with the Lions in terms of McNeil and Reeder, just because he has the size to be a nose tackle, but he almost profiles better as kind of a three technique. So, and also there's no guarantee he's getting the 28th overall. So there's, like I said, a lot to like about him. In terms of offensive line, I mentioned Donovan Jackson and Zabel. Tyler Booker, also another name that's been thrown around as an offensive line kind of guy at the guard position. And then obviously Mike Green still kind of hanging around, although I don't know if he's going to get there. So, yeah, a lot of different options, a lot of different guys to do your homework on. This is kind of the fun part before it really starts to narrow down at the combine or after the combine and moving into pro days and things of that nature. You're going to really start to see the scope of players narrow out as analysts have conversations with people in front offices and really start to hammer down where each team's looking to go. So enjoy this. Enjoy the opportunity of looking at 300 names and saying, oh, I could see each one of these guys on my team. So a lot of fun this time of year, man. It's a lot of fun.
Make sure you check in with Lions on SI as we profile, bring you the information as to what's being talked about nationally, locally regarding the draft prospects. Now, we teased it earlier on the Lone Wolves podcast in the last episode. Just based on what you're reading and learning about Hendon Hooker, the way the organization feels about him, any quarterbacks, are they jumping off the page as potentially someone that the Lions could look at to draft? I know the Milrows are out there, but you recognize that, all right, maybe there's a chance. I think the chances are low that they draft another quarterback. Maybe they go veteran in regards to remaining competitive at the backup spot. I think Hendon Hooker, is still at this point in time, when you look at it, is a prospect that's developing, and you see a player that the organization still probably needs more from. So with Hendon Hooker, do you see competitiveness? Do you see them bringing in a veteran? Or do you say to yourself, hey, maybe there's a prospect that they can develop? They still got Jake Fromm, who obviously they believe in because they offered him a future reserves contract. I think the odds are low based on what you're hearing about the quarterback market later on in the draft. But anybody catch your attention that could be a developmental guy that the Lions bring in?
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting when you look at this quarterback class. I think it's a two-horse race at the top. Obviously, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders. I think both of those guys, just based on the value of the position and their overall traits, I think they'll both be top 10 picks. And then a lot of buzz on Jackson Dart as kind of the QB3. I'm not the biggest Jackson Dart guy. I just think in terms of fit with the Lions, he profiles a lot like how Hendon Hooker did coming out. And I don't think he necessarily has the arm talent that Hooker had, but I think that a lot of what they did offensively, if that makes sense, is similar. And it's a lot of progressions in front of him or easy reads to where if this is not taken away, I know I have this. Or if this pass over the middle isn't available, I know I've got my flats. And I think that just the nuance of the NFL game is going to take some time for him to adapt to. And so I don't really see that being a great fit. If you're going to look further down the line, a guy that's interesting, but I don't think the Lions will be in on is Tyler Shook out of Louisville. Just an older guy who I believe has played 7 years in college just due to injuries. And so age, obviously, they've kind of taken that chance with Hendon Hooker, who was experienced coming out of college and a little bit on the older side. And I don't think they would want to do that again. So, yeah, I mean, I don't really love the fits of some of these guys. I honestly, I like, to be completely honest, I think the best fit in this class is Jalen Milroe. And the reason for that is, you don't have to necessarily, play him as a quarterback right away. You can just put him in special packages or unique situations, and he can give you a different look for the offense if you're trying to kind of diversify your scheme because his ability to run, like he is really fast. He's an excellent runner. Obviously, the throwing, like there's a lot of concerns about his ability to throw the ball, but I think that his athletic ability of this group of quarterbacks, he's the guy who can help the Lions the most. And I'm not saying I'm drafting him at 28 or maybe he's still around at 60. Who knows? I think that potential will probably get him drafted fairly early. But there's a lot to, like, if you're going to ask me what quarterback best fits the Lions, I think it's Jalen Milroe at this stage of the offseason.
Okay, we'll see how the Lions view the quarterback spot. A lot will be told. Make sure you pay attention to Lions on SI as we bring you coverage from the Combine next week. We'll have another podcast before the Combine, just going more in depth into what we're going to look for, what the Lions need to kind of learn, and who potentially could jump off the page early on based on projections. Christian, great work this week. Always enjoy firing it up, having a football conversation with you. Everyone, thank you for your support of the Lone Wolves podcast. You can find all the clips, the full podcast now on YouTube as well, but also too, you can visit daily insider analysis, highlights, videos, learning about the Detroit Lions on an insider basis, visiting si.com/NFL/Lions. And that's where you can get videos, information, learning about what's being said nationally about the Lions locally, and learning the buzz about what's potentially happening with Myles Garrett. Could the Lions trade up, trade down? All that to come still on Lions on SI as the end of February hits and the coming days before free agency. Thanks everybody for your support. Can't wait to fire it up next time on the latest Detroit Lions Lone Wolves podcast.